It's preparing. And it's do you guys need a link for the YouTube link?
Yeah, yes, please. So I can make sure I send the right one out to everybody.
Okay. It's preparing. And it's do you guys need a link for the YouTube link?
Yeah, yes, please.
Yeah, Lassie, send it to me when you get it, please.
Yeah.
Ah, okay, I see it now. All right, I will share it.
I just changed the link.
Okay, there we go. I just shared it with everybody. I will now turn off my social media, so you cannot reach me via chat anymore, except on Zoom. So there are no weird noises in the background, like this. Okay, cool. So the YouTube recording has started. We are live and streaming. Can everybody hear me and see everybody else? Everybody's nodding. Very good. Thank you very much. I will start with the introductions then. First of all, greetings everyone. Welcome to today's event. It's titled The Armed International Conflict in Ukraine, 1.5 years later. My name is Lasse Boysen. I'm a strategic analyst focusing on Sino-European affairs, as well as all related US geostrategy. And I'm talking to you live from Vienna, Austria. Today, I will be your moderator. Our hosts on the other side are the journalists of the China Academy with a YouTube channel, Wave Media. The China Academy is a media outlet that was established by a group of young media professionals and academics in China. They have extensive reach in and very unique access to influencers at all levels of Chinese society, be they in the Chinese government, media, academia, or in business communities. So reach out to them if you want very high quality contacts. They are operating through multimedia distribution and on-demand consulting. They seek to provide up-to-date and in-depth contextual information about contemporary China. So everything China related, they should be your first talking point. Okay, so they work with subject matter experts who advise China's top decision makers, which makes them very unique in the amount of influence they have themselves. And they have already a proven track record where in a very short amount of time, they created a syndicate of intellectual content with over 150 million online subscribers. They are mostly Chinese youth subscribers, and they have a nationally top-rated current affairs TV show, and all of this only took them 4 years since its inception. So they are a very, very well-established team, and you can find their social media presence under the name Wave Media on YouTube, Bilibili, TikTok, X, formerly known as Twitter, and a range of other media platforms. Okay, so with that introduction, our hosts and I now invite everyone to a panel discussion with our 4 popular international analysts. They are experts in their field who have been closely following the armed conflict in Ukraine for the past 1.5 years. And before I go into the details of who they are, I will first of all describe the overall event that you will be able to witness today. We are trying to predict the future. Okay, many people have been providing regular updates from their fields of expertise, from political analysis to military analysis to social analysis. However, the big yet rarely touched real question is, where will all of this lead? All of these analysis we have done, what will it lead to? Okay, what are all the things that we have seen in the past 1.5 years going to actually accomplish for anybody? Can predictions about this future even be made, and can it be made with confidence? Ukraine, Russia, the United States, the EU, China, NATO, the BRICS, all kinds of actors are working on their own goals. And after 1.5 years of international armed conflict in Ukraine, can we find consensus on who is winning, on who is losing, and how things will turn out in the long term? Our now 4 panelists will provide a summary of what they believe the future holds. And I hope you will find very valuable insight in what they have to say. Okay, so first things first, before we begin, let me introduce our experts, and I will be going in alphabetical order. First, we have Alex from Reportify Media. Alex is a Canadian journalist based in China who has been following the conflict we will be talking about today closely, with a special focus on the frontline reports of independent American war reporter Patrick Lancaster, who you might have also heard of. Second, we have Brian Berletic. Brian is a former US Marine who is based in Thailand currently, and he has spent the past few years running his new Atlas YouTube channel, which focuses on US geostrategy and military capabilities of the US government, as well as other countries. Third, we have Jason Pengcheng, or Jason Jiang, as he is calling himself today. Jason is a very popular, yet still anonymous Chinese analyst and opinion leader on Bilibili, who has been analyzing the conflict with a strong focus on military strategy. And last but not least, our 4th panelist is Michael Rossi. Mike is a professor for political science and Russia expert teaching at Rutgers University in the US. He has become internationally famous for making full English translations of speeches delivered by key representatives of the Russian and Ukrainian governments available online. That is a very valuable service indeed. So, welcome to everybody. Thank you for being here. And to our audience, please ensure you check out all of the introduced experts channels and social media platforms and support them with your likes, your comments, and your subscriptions, because today they are here all volunteering their time completely free of charge to provide you with their well-researched insights. And we believe there is value in that service. So please check them all out if you have not seen them yet, and make sure you support them. Okay, so now for the actual event. To set the record straight, this is not going to be a debate. That is what makes today's event unique. We will moderate away any direct disagreement. We seek only to answer questions. So we are here today to learn from each other's insights and not to continue a battle on the airwaves. So each of our experts will be given a 10 to 20-minute block where they can freely express their opinions on the ongoing conflict and make their predictions of what they believe the future holds. This 10 to 20-minute free talk will be followed by a 10 to 20-minute question block where the other experts, as well as maybe our esteemed audience, will be able to ask questions of the speaker. Okay, so make sure these are questions that will further your own understanding of the other speaker's position. And we will go on around after each speaker, asking every other speaker to ask their questions to that speaker. There was a lot of speakers. So once that is completed, maybe there will still be time for an open discussion with audience questions, but the event is booked for only 2 hours and we wasted a bunch of time discussing technical issues, but maybe some of them might stay longer and you will be able to ask your questions. So stick around until the end, so you will get your chance to ask your questions of our experts, to our experts. Okay, now it's 1:30 p.m. approximately here in Vienna, making it 7:30 in China, or 7:30 p.m. in China, or 7:30 a.m. on the East Coast of the United States, making this a truly world-spanning international event. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to our first speaker today, which will be, and let me use my four-sided die that I have specially prepared to make it random. It will be Brian Beletic. So Brian.
Okay. Okay. So, 10 to 20 minutes, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we should start by asking ourselves how this entire conflict began. Did this begin in February 2022 by Russia crossing over into Ukrainian territory? Is that how this conflict actually began? And the answer, I don't think anyone would claim that that is the answer. This conflict began at least as early as 2014 with the US engineered overthrow of the Ukrainian government. They installed a rabidly anti-Russian client regime into power in Kiev. And from that point onward, Ukraine began militarizing. Some may even call this process the NATOization, de facto NATOization of Ukraine. The US had from 2014 onward begun training the Ukrainian military. And also at the same time, the new client regime in Kiev began implementing anti-Russian policies targeting language, religion. There were opposition in the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine, which are very significant in terms of the percentage of population, and this resulted in armed conflict. The US was arming and training the Ukrainian military to facilitate this conflict, and it raged from 2014 until the Russian intervention in 2022. So Russia did not start a war, they intervened in the middle of an ongoing war, an internal war between anti-Russian client regimes being backed in Kiev against the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine. Of course, there was also Crimea, which joined the Russian Federation in 2014. A lot of people don't understand that even as part of Ukraine, it was an autonomous republic. It had an independent parliament. That parliament asked Russia to send troops so that they could organize a referendum and join the Russian Federation. And when we really think about the whole process from when Crimea joined the Russian Federation to today, they have been spared the majority of the murder and mayhem, the violence, the conflict, the economic downturn that has gripped the rest of Ukraine. Keeping all of this in mind, we have to ask ourselves, why did the United States install a client regime in Kiev in 2014? And the answer is it is part of a wider policy of encircling and containing Russia. This goes hand in hand with the constant expansion eastward of NATO. Even after the Cold War ended, after the Soviet Union collapsed, the birth of the Russian Federation, the NATO alliance continued expanding eastward up to Russia's borders. And there are many videos out there that do a time lapse that shows how NATO was creeping up and surrounding Russia. And a very similar process is taking place between the US and China in the east. And when you zoom all the way out on an entirely geopolitical scale, you can see that this is a encirclement and containment policy aimed at both Russia and China. So when you understand all of that, and then you zoom back into the conflict taking place in Ukraine specifically, then you can understand what is actually at stake, what Russia is fighting for, what the United States is attempting to achieve, why they're so eager to continue this proxy war. And that is what it is. It is a proxy war, to continue this proxy war at the cost of Ukrainian blood and Ukrainian territory. They want to extend and exhaust Russia in a very similar way they believe they extended the Soviet Union, leading to its collapse. So looking at where this is going to go, let's look at how the Russian special military operation played out from February last year up until present day. The Russian Federation made what some call a thunder run, this quick movement into Ukraine. trying to overwhelm Ukrainian positions as quickly as possible. They were able to take all the way up to Kherson. They were able to establish the beginnings of the land bridge between Crimea and the rest of Russia. They had troops outside of Kiev, and then began a process. There was a process of establishing a military reality in Ukraine and then offering negotiations to Ukraine and obviously their Western backers. Before the special military operation was launched, there were the Minsk agreements, and these were agreements that were meant to stop the fighting inside Ukraine before the special military operation began. It would have preserved Ukraine's territorial integrity, save for Crimea, which had joined the Russian Federation entirely. And it would have given Ukraine basically what they are demanding right now. But they did not negotiate. They insisted on fighting on, and this really was the United States and their allies encouraging Ukraine to fight on. So Russia decided to push forward. They took Zaporozhye and Kherson. They incorporated Donetsk and Lugansk. So they have these a growing number of Ukrainian oblasts being absorbed into the Russian Federation. And now we are at a situation where Ukraine staged this massive offensive that they had been preparing for months and months. And there were expectations that they would sweep through Russian defenses. We heard for months and months how the Russian Federation, their forces were incompetent, poorly led, poorly equipped, and how they would just fold ahead of this sweeping Ukrainian offensive involving NATO main battle tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, HIMARS. This is what we had heard for months. The reality, however, and this is a reality that you're able to discern by even looking through Western media reports, all in the lead up to the offensive, there was no possible way to train Ukraine in using this NATO equipment effectively on the battlefield. This takes a year or more, and Ukraine did not have that amount of time. There's also the reality of the West's military industrial output. They have reorganized their military over the course of decades to fight small wars against developing nations with little or no formal military structure. They have neglected their military industrial output because they were trying to maximize profits, and maintaining additional industrial output and not using it is going to cut into the profit margin. So they left themselves in a very precarious situation to engage in a large-scale, protracted, intense conflict like what is playing out in Ukraine right now. And Russia, on the other hand, inherited a massive military industrial capacity from the Soviet Union. In many ways, they maintained it. In many ways, they modernized and upgraded or expanded it. And that process continues to this day. This gives the Russian Federation the ultimate advantage in what is now a war of attrition. The offensive has clearly failed. There had been a lot of disagreement before the offensive was launched, but now you even see the Western media agreeing that the offensive has so far failed. They have not achieved their objectives. We're approaching 3 months of fighting. They are exhausting their forces, and they have not even reached the first of several layers of Russian defenses. And so this is clearly not going to unfold the way Ukraine and their Western sponsors envisioned. And because of that, that is where we start to look at where this is going to go next. Russia has no interest in ending this conflict and in any sort of stalemate, and then allowing whatever remains of Ukraine to join NATO. The whole purpose of this is to prevent NATO from continuing to encircle, contain, and eventually encroach within the Russian Federation. So they are going to continue. The West is going to have to make concessions, and we know the West is not very good at doing that. And so what most likely is going to happen, if I had to predict the future, we're going to see the West attempt to freeze it in other ways, maybe not at the negotiation table, but maybe by creating a buffer zone in Western Ukraine, the same way the United States created buffer zones in Syria. That conflict has more or less been frozen. It continues in certain ways, but in other ways it has been frozen. And it continues to this day. That was from 2011 to present day. I believe they are looking at options to establish a very similar situation in Ukraine. Ultimately, this is not going to work. We can see the US position in Syria becoming increasingly precarious, and this is because of external factors that are changing over time. The decline of US-led unipolarism, the emergence of multipolarism, the de-dollarization of the global economy, all of these are ticking clocks that are eventually going to undermine the US position, both in Syria, I believe it already has begun doing that, and eventually in Ukraine as well. And with that, I think I will leave it there and turn it over to the next participant.
No, you're not allowed to go. Everybody else is, of course, going to ask you questions.
Sure.
So in summary, after recapping what has happened so far, you believe that the US is aiming at freezing the conflict, similar to Syria, but you believe ultimately this will prove futile and become more unstable as time goes on, similar to how it's happening in Syria right now. I will now go through each participant and ask them if they want to ask you any questions, and if not, I will just assume that they agree perfectly with everything you said. So, Alex, do you have any questions for Brian?
Fully support what Brian says. Agreed.
Okay. Mike?
So far we are on the same page here. I don't think that there's going to be any room for debate.
That's boring. Okay.
I know.
Jason, do you have any questions for Brian? Jason, we cannot hear you. I can see that you are unmuted, but we cannot hear your voice.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
I think I heard that Brian, you are ex-military. I'm curious that from your perspective, the casualties from both sides, because nowadays we don't have any confirmed numbers of the casualties. What do you think of this? I mean, they said Russians, lots of people are killed, and Ukrainians, lots of people are killed, but we don't have the exact numbers. And even in Wikipedia, everything there are huge gaps. What do you think of that?
I think that was a really good question. I think there's no actual perfect answer to this. I would say that looking at this over the last year and a half, I would say the Russian Ministry of Defense has actually been giving out the most realistic numbers, including numbers regarding Russian losses. They only provided, I think, 1 or 2 instances where they gave a list of the total losses of Russian forces, and that corresponded roughly to a Media Zona and BBC investigation that was tallying up Russian losses by actually confirming each death. The numbers were very close to one another, and I think, what does that tell you? If the BBC is British state media, Media Zona is straight up anti-Russision propaganda, and if their numbers are very similar to the Russian Ministry of Defense's numbers, I think that kind of indicates that it's not a perfect number, but it's very close to realistic. And of course, regarding Ukrainian losses, we're starting to hear even the Western media admit at least that there are huge losses, maybe not agreeing with the Russian Ministry of Defense numbers, but they're agreeing that they are staggering. And of course, just looking at the situation from a military point of view, Ukraine has no air power. They have insufficient artillery, and they're sending men across minefields to demine them with their body and their vehicles. There's absolutely no way you can do this and not incur massive casualties. And at one point, if people remember, during the Russian siege on Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, Ukrainian government admitted they were losing at least 200 dead a day. So if you do the calculations and you look at that over the last year and a half, you will see that if you look at that and you assume that that number went up during certain periods of time where the fighting became increasingly intense, and went down during certain periods where there was a bit of a relative lull, the number really does match very closely to what the Russian Ministry of Defense put out. Of course, the numbers, the Ukrainian government is putting out regarding Russian losses are ludicrous. If any of that was true, a completely different reality would be manifesting itself on the battlefield.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. I have one last question, and I wanted to bring a bit of Marxist analysis into this, considering we are China-focused today, hosted by a Chinese organization. Marxists are always looking for the main contradictions between two parties in a conflict. In the war that is currently raging in Ukraine, Brian, who do you think are the two main parties whose interests are in direct conflict with each other? Who are the main contradictory parties? What do you believe are their respective goals? And who do you believe might win in the medium to long term, this conflict specifically?
I think this is another really good question. If you really think about it, it is the United States and the Russian Federation. These two nations, these two government circles of interest, they are at odds. And this is why we have an ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The US, when they talk about Ukraine, they all but admit that it's a proxy war. They are fighting Russia with Ukrainians and sparing their own soldiers, their own equipment, etc. So that is the main contradiction. When you really think about it, US interests in Ukraine are also at cross purposes with the actual people living in Ukraine, including the client regime in Kiev that is helping facilitate this proxy war. This does not benefit them and their best interests. Their long-term self-preservation, I don't believe, is being served by participating in what is a US proxy war against Russia. So the United States, again, their goal is to reassert hegemony, primacy in Europe and achieve global hegemony. And they have to do this by eliminating peer and near peer competitors. Russia is one of those competitors. China is the other primary competitor. Russia, obviously, this is a matter of self-preservation. I think they have been very patient, very restrained in the process of encirclement and encroachment that the US has pursued since the end of the Cold War. And I believe this is their patience running out. They sense the weakness of the United States, and they see this as an opportunity for them to reassert their national security interests. We have to note that many people try to compare Russia invading Ukraine to, say, the United States invading Iraq, but I would just point out that Ukraine had previously been part of Russia throughout history. It is right on Russia's borders. When the Russians go into Ukraine, they're able to speak with the people there without interpreters. This is entirely different than the United States going to Iraq on a false pretense with no discernible actual national security threat to the United States. This is a country that has absolutely no relation in any shape, form, or way to the US. So I think I hope that explains the main contradiction is actually a war between the US and Russia, not actually between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah. Do you believe one of those conflict parties' interests will prevail, or do you believe they will both just lose or win in one way or another?
I believe the Russians are very well positioned to protect their self-preservation. And I do believe in the long term, they will achieve their national security interests. I think a lot of people looking at this from the outside in and looking at the future of NATO, I think they could see this as a nail in NATO's coffin. And that, NATO is aimed directly at Russia.
Understood.
And Russia,
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And just to put a cherry on top, when do you believe will the US successfully freeze this conflict, at least until it becomes unstable again? Will it be a month? Will it be a year? Will it be 10 years?
I believe the United States is in the process right now of attempting to freeze it. I don't think they have any realistic thought that this is going to continue in their favor. They want to freeze it. They're going to start right now trying to freeze it. When will they be successful? I don't know, because I think Russia does not want this to be frozen. They have nothing to lose by keeping this conflict going. Unless the United States can somehow propose very convincing terms in some sort of negotiation, Russia will not stop. And considering how the Minsk agreements were admittedly used to buy time to rearm Ukraine. I can't see Russia ever agreeing to any of that. So it'll be the US trying to freeze it as soon as possible, and Russia doing everything it can to prevent that from happening.
Understood. Thank you very much, Brian. This is perfectly 1/2 hour later. You used your time perfectly. Thank you so much. Let's skip to the next person. I will once again use my 4-sided die. And it's Brian again. I will go again. And it is Jason. Welcome, Jason. Your
Okay.
10 to 20 minutes of monologue to describe your views on the ongoing war, as well as where you predict the future will be.
Okay. May I share my screen if I may?
You may, but I don't know if it's possible. 1 second.
Yes, I try to
You
share
can
my
share
screen.
first, and if I will check it. Maybe I think you will have the.
Is it possible for you to send your PowerPoint to Rui, and Rui will share the screen, which makes everything easier?
Probably because I will be using an interactive map, and
Okay.
if you may, I can.
Can you give him the permission?
Okay.
May
Shall
I
we
have the
skip
permission to share the
shall
screen?
we skip to another candidate first while you make sure you can?
Yeah, sure.
应该是可以。
Good. So we will move on to the next person. It is Brian again. Brian is really popular with his die today. It is Alex. Alex from Reportify Media.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think what we need to do is take a deep breath and really kind of look back in history on when this whole conflict unfolded. And we have to even go back further than if we're going to discuss about the Ukraine and Russian conflict right now. We have to go back to the fall of the Soviet Union to understand how most of these countries got in this situation, why most of these countries are still in a conflict today. You see, there's been a lot of focus on the Ukraine, its borders, its territory. We hear things like sovereignty, Ukraine sovereignty. What really is that? If it's about sovereignty and it's about Ukraine trying to protect its borders, then you have to ask yourself, then why in 2014 did its own army fire on its own civilians? Yes, that did happen. That was a fact, and that remains a fact today. And this is a narrative that the Western media has ignored because it was a failed attempt. Of course, they did remove the sitting president of the Ukraine at that time. But today, we still do not see, back in 2014 and 15, an election that took place that brought a new one in because, well, the American government decided Ukraine's future for them. So is this conflict with Ukraine and Russia? I'd have to say it's a proxy war, as Brian Berletic has clearly demonstrated in his last segment about what is going on in this area and how it could unfold. I'm going to add a little bit more narrative to that. If we look and try to understand why these conflicts are going on and why these, we'll call it, civilians are rising up against governments, it's for a very clear reason. Because when the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of people were displaced. And to understand that, you have to understand the geography. Now, maps will always be rewritten for years. Okay, into the future, there will be more territory taken by another nation or another country, but that's how conflicts are settled. But if we look into this situation, this is about a country that is protecting its citizens or ethnicity of these individuals, even though they're on the outside borders of their country. And let me give you some numbers to think about. The Baltic states, NATO members, okay. The Baltics have several ethnics, but one of them is Russian. 33% in Latvia, 25.4% in, let's say, the Lithuania, and over 30%, almost 900,000 in total in the Baltic states alone, or ethnic speaking Russians. Now I'm going to add something onto that. Estonia is a good example of potentially another country that could definitely get involved in this situation very quickly. Estonia, till this day, 10% of their population are living stateless in their country. Now you may say, Alex, what does that mean? They're Estonian citizens. Actually, they're not. They are Russians that still believe that they want to keep their ethnics. They could be a grandmother or an uncle or a brother that, let's say, was living in Estonia after the fall of the Soviet Union. Still Russian, but according to Estonia, you're not. Because by the laws that have gone down in Estonia, which are human rights laws that you should really look into, if you look into the details, these people are stateless. And in fact, the Estonian government is so polite in their humiliation that they've given them gray passports, alien passports on the cover. Now, this is an unresolved issue. What does a gray passport mean? That means, well, you can stay in Estonia, you can work in Estonia, you can kind of travel around Europe. You can't get any of the European Union benefits, but we'll let you stay and we'll humiliate you until you give up that Russian passport. What's that mean? It's in the laws in Estonia. It's on the books of the laws in Latvia. It's in the laws of Lithuania. No dual nationality. So the choice for these ethnic speaking Russians are very clear. Forget about your past. Forget about your language. Train yourself to understand a new language. And then, and only then, we will make you a citizen. But whatever passport or family that you had that you want to keep in touch with, well, we're going to have to sever those ties from a passport or a citizen angle, and you'll be a proud Estonian. But yet, you won't have that access to the motherland, maybe where you were born. And we wonder why people are rising up and fighting for this. This modern day, I don't know the right word for it, but I'd have to say it's a cleansing of some sort, sponsored by the European Union. And we may think that this is just isolated in Estonia, but oh, no, no, no. This happened in Transnistria. I bet you most of the people watching this program today have probably never even heard of Transnistria. This was a conflict also that happened in 1990 and lasted for almost 2 years. Kind of sounds familiar, right? Thousands of people have died in Transnistria because they were ethnic Russians being forced to become part of the Republic of Moldova. They said no. And to this day, to 2023, for over 20 years since the fall, these people have got their own passport, their own currency, their own identity, and they refuse to be told to give up their culture, their livelihood, their connection to the motherland. And that place borders, get this, the Ukraine and Moldova, the doorstep to Europe. Where are the diplomats in Europe that want this to end? They don't, as Brian Berletta has clearly said. Does America want this to slow down, wind down? The Americans are not in control at this time. The Russians are in control at this time, and they will decide where this ends. If we fast forward to the situation where we're in now, watching this conflict myself, watching independent crowdfunded journalists like Patrick Lancaster, who originally got me into this type of content, geopolitical stuff, I couldn't find any answers on the other side of the Donbass area, except from one man, and that was Patrick Lancaster. And at the time, Patrick was the first guy I ever heard of in 2015 where I've ever heard the term called demonetized. Think about that for a minute. 8 or 9 years ago, hearing that word demonetized. I said, what does that mean, Patrick? He says, well, Silicon Valley, the big names, they don't want me to put my message out. I thought that was a bit strange. A few weeks later, he said, PayPal has disabled my account. I thought, wow, this is interesting. The more I heard, the more that he was being silenced, the more I wanted to go down there and meet him. Eventually I did. He was one of the first people, the first channels I ever donated to because I was tired of seeing the narrative on the Western media. My wife is Lithuanian. She speaks Russian. Her father was from Belarus. This is a culture, and these people are connected in many ways to Russia. Whatever crazy mandate the Americans, these NATO-led countries have on trying to cleanse these European countries of Russia, well, Judgment Day is here. The country of Russia that has 6,500 or 6,257 nuclear warheads is going to stand up for itself at any cost. They've seen pipelines bombed. Their downtown areas, desperation, drone attacks in the center of Moscow. How crazy can America get to lead this? We've seen this conflict drag into its second year. The Americans have donated 8,500 javelins, 1,155 millimeter howitzers, 50 howitzers, 100,000 mortar shells, 38 multiple rocket launcher HIMARS, 109 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. They've trained 15,000 soldiers. The list goes on and on and on. France, 550 million military aid and growing. Training of Ukraine soldiers. Anti-tank missiles. 2 LRU type multi-rocket launchers. I mean, Brian Berletic knows about all this stuff. He's covered it many a times. Germany, 14 Leopard 2 tanks. Patriot air defense systems. 500 Stingers. The list goes on. A large number of armored vehicle weapons. Spain, 6.7 million rifles and pistols. Incredible list of artillery. Killing machine artillery, we call it. Or as Lindsey Graham says, to the last Ukraine. And you know, there was a question asked earlier in this program of how many casualties. When I heard the term, our tank got stuck because there was so many casualties we couldn't drive over them, that is a very sobering thing to hear from somebody that is reporting from that area. The Netherlands, 200 Stinger missiles. Poland, billions of dollars from Poland. Absolutely incredible. I'm going to leave my conversation on this topic right there because I have much more to share. But these are staggering numbers. If America has not learned from its failed attempt in the Yugoslavian war that broke up the Yugoslavia in 78 days of aerial bombardment of that country, NATO-led, by the way, my oh my, these next few months are going to be a sobering reminder that conflicts don't end by pumping more artillery into Ukraine. It's done by diplomacy, and that's the only way out of this mess. Thank you for my time.
No, thank you, Alex. That was very powerful indeed. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Before I ask my own questions, I will go in a round again. Brian, do you have any questions for dear Alex?
I mean, obviously, I agree with everything Alex is talking about. I'm just wondering what, in his opinion, how he thinks this is all going to end.
You know, Brian, we've had this discussion many times. And when you have a country like America that has had its military industrial complex, its economy based on selling equipment, killing makes a killing for a lot of these companies. You know, when you have BlackRock that has been investing heavily into this artillery, to these weapons that kill people, and then their second investment is the media, trying to tell a story that supports it, I think this is not going to de-escalate. I think there is going to be an act of desperation. There's going to be more countries involved. And I think, as we call this show here today, 1.5 years, I believe it's 1.5 years Ukraine, something like that later. Am I right on that, Lassie? Are we correct on that term?
Indeed, yes.
Brian, to answer that question, I think Ukraine is finished as a country. I do not think Ukraine will ever be Ukraine again. I think it will be cut up in so many pieces, just like Yugoslavia was. And that'll be it. That's the end of it. And that's, I think we're going to see escalation. We're going to see the geography, the map rewritten. And that is it, because as the Russians move over, if they take Odessa, that connects Transnistria. Transnistria connects it up. Probably Moldova will fall. And as we say, the rest is history. I hope that kind of clarifies my answer for you.
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Jason, do you have any questions for Alex?
Yeah, I was trying to ask what's his opinion about when the war will end, and I think Brian, you already answered, and thank you.
Cool. And Mike, do you have any questions for Alex?
Not so much a question, but an observation. I agree with everything Alex has said. I wish that I could disagree, because they are rather bleak in his assessments, but he's not wrong. You touched upon a very interesting subject, and that is the Baltic states. Now, the Baltics are these countries that, according to Western academia, Western policymaking, these are the success stories. These are the 3 countries that prepared their secession. They are in the EU. They are in NATO. We don't regard them as post-Soviet. We regard them as honorary members of Central Europe. And that term is much more optimistic than post-Soviet. And yet, the Baltics have skeletons in their closets as far as what they have done behind the scenes in order to Europeanize. And I just want to make a quick note here, because I'll mention this in my own presentation, but Estonia, and to a greater extent Latvia, can be thrown in along with Ukraine now in the last year, and to a lesser but no less hidden extent, Poland and Hungary. In terms of when you either have a small enough minority that does not prove to be a major political threat to your country, or you just simply marginalize that minority, like we find in Latvia and Estonia. It's amazing what you can get away with if you exhibit the pro-EU sentiments. If you wave the right flag and you say the right things, it is amazing not only what rhetoric you can get away with, but what wartime collaborators in the 1940s you can rehabilitate. And, Ukraine's got a big right-wing problem, which, of course, every time we bring that up, oh, no, you can't be saying that. But the Baltics get away with it simply because no one pays attention to the Baltics. The hidden minorities within Estonia and Latvia are things that are just widely ignored, I think, just simply because it's of no interest. And I think it's a rather inconvenient truth for Western consumption. And I have a number of inconvenient truths that I'm going to be mentioning in my own presentation. So I just wanted to point that out and say that was an interesting thing. In the idea that minorities in Europe are only good minorities provided that they accept their second-class status within a country, whether it's the Serbs of Croatia, or better yet, the Serbs of the disputed territory of Kosovo, right? Serbs certainly have a future in Kosovo, but they need to make a number of, they need to accept a number of realities that they don't want. And if the minority does not accept their role as the model minority, institutional problems abound.
Yes, indeed. Alex, thank you so much for raising that point, and Mike for adding to it. This is, of course, a point that is or has been echoed for a long time since the beginning of the conflict. The things that Alex mentioned were also echoed at the same time by people like Scott Ritter, who has become very popular worldwide for his analysis and insights on the US military, who said, I believe, as one of the first people, oh, the next conflict we need to look out for is actually going to be Transnistria, and what's developing there. So very good that you two made it a big point of your analysis. Dear Alex, you also mentioned, of course, the pipeline. That is a big point for me as a German, of course. This is something I find personally unbelievable, considering that one of our key infrastructure projects was simply blown up by whoever it was. We pretend we don't know. I assume for the time being that it's true that we don't know, although I have very strong suspicions what happened. But shifting the blame first to the US, and then from the US to Ukraine, my big question as a German is, how is it possible for our government to support the Ukrainian government that has allegedly blown up our pipeline? And if our government doesn't believe this to be the case, why hasn't there been a big investigation into this specific topic of who exactly it was and why this is not being talked about at all in Germany or in Europe at large? And I believe there are some very good reasons for that we shouldn't discuss today, but thank you for bringing it up, Alex. I have a question for you, Alex. So considering that you disagree with Brian ever so slightly on where this is going to lead. Brian says the US is going to freeze it. It will eventually be frozen somehow and then might escalate again in other ways. You believe, no, it will just keep escalating and there will be some countries next. Overall, do you believe there is going to be any way of stopping this entire process?
I think I want to allow Brian for a moment to clarify. I think he was pretty clear that he said America was going to try to slow this conflict down, but he said in the same line that he believed that it was kind of up to Russia to be the decider of the timetable. Am I correct on that, Brian? I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, yes, but also there is the possibility that the US will escalate, just as you said. There's also that possibility. I'm looking at what the US has done historically, but this is a special case because Russia and China, these are the last two pieces of the puzzle for the US. They are out of time. They're out of time for containing Russia and also China. If they cannot get this done, then they are not going to do it at all. So there is the possibility, as Alex suggests, that this could actually escalate. So I think that is also a possibility.
I think we're on the same wavelength there.
I'm just
so-
trying to create a bit of drama between you two, so
Well-
we have some opposing views that we can discuss.
I think you know, if I could have a couple of seconds just to address the Baltic issue here, where our last guest speaker brought it up by saying, you know, all ethnics get in line and follow the EU in their approach. Here's something that I think if you're not from the Baltics, you won't understand it. And having a wife of 20 years that is from Lithuania, she said to me, on the surface, these countries look like the dream model that have fallen into the European Union, the Baltic tigers, they used to call them, the emerging economies, these picture perfect countries that have welcomed NATO, welcomed the European Union, welcomed the euro. But she says, if you scratch the surface on these countries, underneath the ground, all those pipes, all those pipelines, all those energies that are pumping that fuel, that oil, that gas, that's all coming from Russia, whether you like it or not. And in the Baltics, there's a nice sliver piece of land called Kaliningrad. And as we say, we might think as Europeans, this is a small minority of people, 900,000 ethnic Russians. They think they can get these people into what they want to clarify as, you know, a single citizen of their country, even though their laws say that it's illegal to have dual nationality. So if you make it illegal to have dual nationality, you force people to take a language that they've never spoken all their life. You're trying to cleanse them of their culture, cleanse them of their historical past. And on top of that, think that these people are not going to rise up because their number's not so big. What on earth happened in the Donbass area? The exact same thing on what may just happen in the Baltic countries like Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. The Ukraine government, within days of the coup, changed the laws. And that sent those ethnic speaking regions of those countries to rise up and say, we're not having any of this. And they're a minority, and they got shelled by their own government. That's right, Ukraine firing on Ukraine, and they're still firing on Ukraine, destroying their own land, or what used to be part of Ukraine. And we don't think these people, these minorities in the Baltics, are going to rise up. You better believe they're going to rise up. They're just waiting. And they're watching. And they're trying to really assess, maybe this is possible because the entire might of NATO, the proxy war, has been unsuccessful. Maybe, just maybe, we'll have our shot. And you might see the Baltic map rewritten. It just might happen. And are people willing to fight for it? Well, that's exactly what has gone on in Donbass. The same thing. When you make people feel like they are worthless and they have no say, and you push them into the corner and you try to silence them, tell them to change their language, trying to change their nationality, it would just take a handful of people to destabilize a country, let alone 20% of the population, which is ethnic Russians. I just want to make that point.
Yeah, so you don't believe in any de-escalation being possible. You believe the march of history will go on and people will eventually reassert themselves against what you call a cleansing of their culture and their ethnicity. Thank you very much. This is very interesting input. I have so many opinions about these topics and so many questions for you, but I will not use this as a soapbox. I caught myself earlier already. I tried to start talking and I caught myself saying, no, I shouldn't. So I tried stopping it as fast as possible, but maybe there will be another time where we can discuss these subjects in more detail. Thank you so much, Alex. Half an hour is over right now. perfect. Once again, we are doing really well today. So without further ado then, I heard that Jason has resolved his technical issues and can now start his delivery. Jason, are you there?
Yes.
Hi, Jason. Over to you.
So can you hear me now and see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So today I want to talk about what I've done during this war. I built up a map using Google Earth since the beginning of the war. I track every brigades of Ukraine and Russia's and what they do. And of course, it's in Chinese. I do it for my own study and show it to my Chinese audience. So today I would like to say something about my prediction about this war. I think Ukrainians are making a huge mistake making this offensive. And I also want to talk about what stage we are in this war, and also what will happen in the coming month, and when will this war end, in my opinion. So since the war began, I use this map for my own study. I track every brigade, what they are doing, and what they have done here. Like we know that Ukrainians are making a lot of new brigades for this war since 2023, and NATO trained them, and they have very good weapons. And unfortunately, they waste that brigades on the southern front. Ukrainians' offensive is such a huge mistake. So this is, if you can say, this is the leaked documents of NATO. These are the 9 brigades of Ukrainians that trained by NATO. And I tracked them one by one. And now we can see that after 2 months of the Ukrainian offensive, all these brigades are in the front lines and they are fighting. And we know that some of them are suffered heavy casualties. And it is such unfortunate for Ukrainians that these brigades are wasted on the southern front on the offensive, and they use it for offensive, not defense. Not in defense. According to the Russian numbers, Ukrainians suffered more than 50,000 casualties during this 2-month offensive. That is such a tragic. If they stand defensive, it would take Russians months to fight this Ukrainian brigades. I mean, these brigades that has very good weapons, such as Germany Leopard 2 tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles. But now they wasted on this front. And what will happen in the coming months? And I think Ukrainian offensive will end in September. They don't have the power anymore. The 9 brigades, and along with other around 10 new brigades that are created by Ukrainians, they are all wasted on this front. And you can see these are the areas they are fighting. If you see from my map, these are the areas. The yellow ones are the lands.
Sorry, just to reiterate, you said September. So
yes.
You believe they only have 1.5 months, less than 1.5 months left.
Less than 1.5, and actually they are not making any progress. If you can see here, this is a very little lands they are just occupied, and you can see the blue line is actually the Russians' main defense, and the Ukrainians are here. It took their 2 months, and still they are fighting. They still can't reach the Russians' major line. And the green line is the 3rd line of defense. So I don't see any possibility that Ukrainians can reach these lines and break through. And Ukrainians' objective, of course, Berdyansk or Mariupol, so that they can cut off the land bridge to Crimea. But I don't think that's going to happen. See, this is their objective, and they are here still and suffering heavy casualties. So I think their offensive will end in September. And what will happen is that I think Russians are making their own offensive towards Slavyansk, but I don't think Russians can take this city very soon. Their first objective may be Liman. This is the city Russians used to conquer in 2022, and Ukrainians took it back. And I think Russians, the first objective is to get this city, this town first. And maybe they will attack Slavyansk next year. And from my perspective, I think I'll ask myself what will happen in the coming month is that, can Russian take all Ukraine? I don't think so, because the Russians just don't have the number. You see, these lines almost didn't change for past for the past year. The Russians don't have the numbers to conquer all Ukrainians. They need around 5 million soldiers to do that. Now they have around 50,000 soldiers on the front. Russians don't have the numbers. But can Russians hold the line? Of course they can hold the line. But can Ukrainians kick Russians out of the Ukraine? Of course not. So eventually I think they have to come to a deal. That is, there must be a peace agreement sometime, maybe next year, maybe this year, or maybe 10 years later. We don't know. When will that happen? I really don't know. But all I can see here is that Ukrainians are suffering heavy casualties, and all their offensive capabilities are going to die out in the coming weeks. And then maybe Russians will come with their own offensive. And I think about around 3 factors that may affect when will this war end. The first is nuclear power plant. So this Zaporozhye nuclear power plant is a strategic asset. This nuclear power plant supplies around 25% of all Ukrainians' electricity. This is strategic asset. So do the Ukrainians want it back? Of course. Actually, what I worried is that when Ukrainians start offensive, they may attack this nuclear power plant in July or August, but they didn't. And then we know that a British intelligence are working here, just across the Dnipro River, but they didn't make the offensive. I don't know why. Maybe the Russians' defense scared them out. And if they attack this nuclear power plant, it's going to be huge. If something goes wrong, this whole area will just be wasted. And let's hope that will not happen. This is X factor 1. And the other factor is the Russian economy. So we know that Russian is suffered a lot of sanctions. Can they sustain an ongoing war for another 2 years? We know that Russian is one of the strongest self-sustaining economy during wartime. But will this sustain for another 2 years? I don't know. Maybe they can, but it's such a big price. Are they willing to pay the price? And the third factor, I think, is US election. If the situation continues that Ukrainians cannot make successful offensive and the Russians are pushing back, the US is not maybe Joe Biden is losing, but Donald Trump is winning. I think maybe United States will take that in mind, and they will make a decision to stop the war this year or next year. That is the best guess for the Ukrainian people. Actually, if the United States said, let's stop the war, and the war will end, and we will have peace. But will that happen? I don't think so. I don't think that will happen very soon. So that's basically my idea about when this war will end. And what is Russia's objective? My guessing is that if you can see the green lines here is the oblast borders. So this is Kherson, this is Zaporozhye, this is Donetsk, and this is Luhansk. Now Moscow says our objective is only these 4 oblasts. But if they want to conquer these areas, I think Russians need to pay more price. And we all know that in Bakhmut, for this city, Russians took this city with around 220 to 30 casualties for this city. So if they want to conquer this whole oblast, they need to pay 10 times more. Do they want to pay this price? if the war continues and Russia make their own offensive, they will, I'm sure they will be able to push the Ukrainians back. And if they want to conquer this whole Donetsk Oblast, I think they will need to pay 10 times the price for Bakhmut, which is simple math. So is the Russians willing to do that? And when will they be willing to do that? I doubt it. So I think for Russians, if they stay on the line, they can just use their artillery power to continue to attack the Ukrainians. But if they want to make a push, they need to pay more human price. So I don't know what Moscow is thinking. But I think if they want to do that, hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. If the Russians want to make the push, they need more infantrymen. And as far as I know, they are preparing for the offensive, and they are hiring around 20,000 soldiers per month, and they are training them just in Kherson and Zaporozhye, and I think they are preparing for their offensive. So my prediction is that. So to conclude, my prediction is that Ukrainians' offensive will end in September. They don't have the power anymore, and it's such a big mistake that the Ukrainians waste their power in this offensive. And for the Russians, I think they will start their own offensive, mainly from the north, from the Luhansk area. Their final objective is Slavyansk, of course, but I don't think they are able to take it this year, probably next year. And if something happened to end this war this year, that's very good for the Russians and the Ukrainians. I mean, for the people, but I doubt whether that will happen. So that's my perspective. So, and one last thing I would like to share is that, to my surprise, that so many people, my Chinese audience are following me to catch up with the Ukrainian war, and I have around 2 million followers in Bilibili and other social platforms. And when I start doing this, tracking those military brigades, I do it for my own study, and then I realized that many Chinese people are watching for this, and I think many of them, they are pro-Russian, and the reason is that because they think this is what, if there's something breaks out in Taiwan, and we will suffer the same sanctions with just like what Russians are suffering now. So this is a role model for us to see what will happen to us, and that's why many people are looking at the Ukrainian wars in China now. So that's my understanding and my perspective. Thank you. Hello, Lazay. Yeah, that's all my sharing for today. If you guys have any questions, we can discuss.
Okay. I'm still here. I think, Brian, you still here?
I'm still here.
Sorry, can nobody hear me? Can you hear me now?
No, yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what, maybe there's a contact wrong in my headphones. Thank you very much, Jason, for this very fact-based and material-based analysis with a very confident opinion on when you believe this entire war, at least the current one, will end. I will hand over to Brian. Brian, do you have any questions for Jason?
Well, I actually had some questions as he was going along. It was a very good presentation, but as he continued, he started answering all of my questions. I think people do underestimate just how much Russia will have to invest to just take the rest of these 4 oblasts. I think people underestimate the ability of any nation in modern warfare to launch these big arrow offensives, these big sweeping offensives people imagine Russia using to take territory. And then I also wanted to know about his audience, Chinese language audience. what their perspective was and how they saw this conflict and how they related it to a potential conflict between the U.S. and China, since ultimately this is a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia, and China is next on America's list. But I think unless he wants to elaborate on any of those points, I think he answered my questions.
Jason, do you have any further opinion on this? How will the Chinese, or what are the most important opinions of the Chinese people regarding this conflict in relation to their views on Taiwan?
Yeah, I think to my surprise, many Chinese people are very interested in this war, and they follow what I do to track this every day. And I think I agree with Brian that this is a proxy war that may happen to China someday. So this is one point. And the second is not all Chinese people support Russia. Actually, some of my friends support Ukraine. So, and actually the two sides fight each other every day on the internet under my video, and just like in Twitter and other platforms. So, but the majority of Chinese people, they look at this war as like, just feel that someday this will happen, especially the sanctions. The sanctions on Russia didn't work so well, and when the sanctions happen to China, can we suffer the same and perform as good as the Russians? We don't know. So this is why we are paying all attention to what the United States will do, and yeah, this is why they're interested.
Thank you.
Alex, do you have any question for dear Jason?
I think it's actually a good time to maybe challenge this debate a little bit and make it a little bit exciting here. So I think I will. In one part in your presentation, which was very good, by the way, fantastic following that and educating definitely the China audience. I commend you for that. So thank you very much. And I listened in detail to your presentation. But in one sense, you said, this is a heavy price for Russia to pay. Are they willing to take this risk? In one point, sanctions, you said, kind of hurt the Russian economy. And then in the other point, you would say, well, sanctions didn't work. So to me, that kind of, and then hearing the time frame, well, Ukraine will give up its offensive in September. Maybe this whole thing will be wrapped up by December. Maybe the Russians will do the defense. My understanding on this conflict is very clear. Russia has bet its entire economy on this war. Everything, every single thing that you can imagine, they risked it. Business relationships, international trading, currency, bilateral trade agreements, taxation agreements, you name it, it's on the line. Their people can't even show up at the Olympics with their own flag. They can't even play in a tennis tournament with their own flag. This country, are they willing to sacrifice? Well, the Soviets sacrificed 27 million in World War II. You can bet your bottom dollar that this conflict is definitely not going to end on Ukraine's terms. This is for all, as we say in Canada, it's for all the marbles. And I think Russia is willing to go right to the bitter end. Now, do they want territories of bombed out villages that are polluted with, cluster munitions? And I don't think Russia really cares more about the territory, but maybe setting an example that, you know what, you can show up, Zelensky and the boys, you can throw as many young soldiers to the front line. We're going to mow them over, keep throwing them up there. If your offensive didn't work, that's fine. We're going to dig in and we're just going to wait. And my understanding, and I don't want to take too much more of the time here, but I think they're going to zip this right up to Transnistria, which I've been there 3 times. I understand strategically why Transnistria is where it is and why I think that is the end goal here, to take away any 1 inch of any coastline to the Ukraine as of a little bit of a learning experience, that if you get into bed with the boys from Washington, you just may lose your country. And I think Russia is willing, and they have bet their economy on it. The numbers, I think, that you're stating, they don't have the numbers you think of, people, soldiers. They do. And would they need them at this point? No, because I think Ukraine is actually eating itself. So I don't know if that should fire up this panel a bit, but yeah.
Yes, thank you, Alex. This is certainly very interesting input, and it is a very good debate to have. But a short reminder: this is specifically not a debate.
Yes.
But you actually raised a very interesting and good point, in my opinion. That was also going to be my question if nobody else had asked it. Jason, considering your overall analysis, you said you were talking about some cities more in the center of Ukraine. My question was actually, why wouldn't Russia try and go over the Dnieper River in the southwest and cross over to Transnistria to unite their territory with the borders of Transnistria?
Well, that is a very good question. Actually, I've been thinking about that since last year. I think, of course, Russians want to take all Ukrainians, the harbors, especially Odessa. Think about that. Take back Odessa, which is one of the most important Soviet harbor in the world, in the history. Of course, they want to do that. But if you guys look, if we look at here, the yellow part, this is the Kherson bridgehead Russian used to have, and actually they withdrew last November. Why? They don't want to. But Dnipro is a big river, and the supply is just not there to sustain a big army here. And the Russians, actually, I tracked those numbers last year, is that Russians put their best VDV soldiers and mechanized brigades in this area to defend this bridgehead. But still, they have to withdraw because this is such a big river. I mean, you can't, it's not an easy way to supply this, to across this river. That's why they withdraw. And since then, I don't think they will be able to cross this river again. And actually, I don't think they will cross the Dnipro River ever again. I mean, for the coming year, for the coming 12 months at least, because it's just that this river is too big. And even if you build up a bridgehead and then you put people across the river, and Ukrainians can blow up the bridge, and that's it. You have to withdraw. So it's that simple. Of course, they want Odessa, and they want to control all this. They want to control the Black Sea, but you need around 5 million people to do that. Now the Russians, they are recruiting new people, the new conscripts, but I think if they want to do that, the first step is, of course, take all the Donetsk and Zaporozhye Oblast, and then maybe Dnipro, and then go west. And this is if that's gonna happen, it's gonna take at least 2 to 3 years to do that, and many people will die. And I don't know if Moscow want to do that. And I agree with Alex that this war will end not in Ukrainians' favor. It's just that how many oblasts and cities Russians will take. And I think United States, actually, I heard of one of the rumors that Poland, maybe Poland will send some of their troops in Ukraine to fight as volunteers and not as Poland official soldiers. If that happens, maybe they can help Ukrainians to hold the line for a little while. But in the coming 6 months, I'm pretty sure the Russians will make their own offensive. And in that case, Ukrainians, I don't think they will be able to hold the line. I mean, for the line here, if you see this progress, this is pathetic. Ukrainians waste a lot of lives
Yeah.
and sacrifice their best troops and Leopard 2 tanks and just make this kind of progress. This is pathetic. So I think the initiative is going back to the Russian part, and they will start their own offensive, maybe
Yeah, so
later this year.
but this is a question from the audience, by the way. Thank you for sharing, China Academy team. Considering all of what you just said and calling the Ukraine offensive pathetic, or the progress of the Ukraine offensive pathetic, what do you believe is the motivation for Ukraine to continue this offensive if they know they are not going to break through any serious defensive line on the Russian side?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would just quote John Mearsheimer's, Professor John Mearsheimer from University of Chicago. He said, actually, many people with a little bit of military sense will know that Ukrainian offensive will fail, but still the West politicians want them to start the fight. Why? Because if they don't make a push and the Ukrainians don't make a good, huge success on the battlefield, and the public support will dry out later this year. And politicians' perspective is very different from military perspective. I don't know whether Brian agree with this, but I think actually many Ukrainian soldiers and their generals, they know that Russians are digging in. They have a very good defensive position, and it's just suicide offensive.
Brian is nodding, so I assume he does
yes,
agree.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And the reason why Ukraine is going to continue fighting despite it benefiting them in no shape, form, or way is because it is precisely a proxy war, and the United States is compelling the leadership, who also is not losing anything in any of this, not yet at least. These are ordinary Ukrainians dying. Of course, it is Ukrainian territory being lost, but the client regime in Kiev only exists because of the support it receives from the West. And as soon as that support is cut, that client regime evaporates. So I think that is the reason. They have no choice but to continue until the US says otherwise.
Cool. Let's leave it at that. Thank you so much, Jason, for your very valuable input and very interesting input. It's a unique perspective with a very strong focus on actual military capabilities. So that's very valuable. Thank you indeed.
Thank you.
Let's move on to our last speaker of today. I don't need to use my die anymore. Mike, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Lasse. Thank you all for being part of this. I just need to just mention that I may need to make a hard exit shortly before 9:30 my time, because I am off to teach a class. Interestingly enough, post-communist transition in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And it's the first day of class for my students at Webster University in Tashkent. So you want to add more to the globalized thing here. I'm here in the US for the first time after 3 semesters.
Amazing. The first thing you should do is link directly to this video so they get introduced to all of you.
Oh, they already know. As soon as this thing is up, this is going in the syllabus. This is definitely going in the syllabus. I am going to, in keeping with what you had said before, I'm going to keep the conversation boring because we all agree with each other here. I mean, Brian, Alex, Jason have all basically said what I believe as well. And I feel like rounding this out from the academic perspective, I have to say that academia is certainly, I wish it were more objective than it is, and it tends to mimic much of what you hear in mainstream media, which is Ukraine is a scrappy little liberal democracy fighting for its freedom and its sovereignty, which again, I guess if you put this in a comparative sense, I mean, yes, Ukraine is more democratic than Russia is. That's not saying much, but it also overlooks a lot of the what I call the inconvenient truths, the inconvenient realities that have happened over the not just the last year and a half, but I would say even before the Euromaidan movement in 2014. Really, we can go back as far as 2008 with the government of Yushchenko. And while a lot of things have already been said here, I have what is basically what I call 10 inconvenient truths about where we are and what has happened so far. The first inconvenient, and this is actually taken from a video that I did on my YouTube channel about around the time of the 1-year anniversary. And so like good academics, we recycle everything for workshops and panels and other elements. And so a lot of it is basically the same. But the first inconvenient truth is that no one, and I mean no one, expected everyone to be where they are a year from the war start, a year and a half. When the war began, I think there was a general assumption in the West that this would be at most a 2-week war. Russia was going to invade, take Kiev, do regime change like the United States does, and that would basically be it. Kiev was almost surrounded. Zelensky was being pressured to leave Kiev, or whether he would, go down fighting. And as it turns out, the offensive towards Kiev was not successful, and the narrative will change depending upon the YouTube channel and the newspaper. Either Russia decided that it was not worth taking Kiev because it would be so many lives would be lost, or they just couldn't take it. But at the same time, no one expected Russia to still be in this. And if we remember, a little bit under a year ago was really the first Ukrainian counteroffensive, in which Russia ceded territory around the Kharkov region as well as Kherson. And I think that this led to the narrative that Russia is a paper tiger, it is weak, and it just simply needs one more military counteroffensive to expel it from the entire country. Russia is still in it. And in fact, if you were to say who are the winners and who are the losers, I can look at it this way. Ukraine is not winning, that much is certain, but Russia's not losing. That's equally true. And since the second counteroffensive began in late May, early June, and Jason's map here, I think, did a really good job of pointing this out, but someone did the statistics, and Ukraine has reclaimed less than 0.5% of the territory that Russia currently controls in Ukraine's south. Now, you won't hear about this in mainstream media because the minute that the Ukrainian army takes a border settlement, this is reported as a major victory and the Russians are being pulled back. The thing is that these little border towns are traded back and forth, a few days here, a few days there. The Russians pull back, Ukrainian forces move in, to which then the Russians bombard the area and push the Ukrainian forces out. Jason also, I think, was really good in showing on the map here that Russia is far from being this weak, incompetent army, but used the time since last October to effectively entrench itself within Ukraine's south and east. We also need to understand that Ukraine gaining back Kherson was not through military means. Russia had withdrawn, and the Ukrainian army just simply moves in. Now, again, a loss is a loss for Russia, a victory is a victory for Ukraine. But when the Ukrainian military goes toe-to-toe with the Russian military, chances are if the Ukrainian side does win, it's a Pyrrhic victory. More often than not, the Russian side tends to have the upper hand. So that kind of leads to the second inconvenient truth, and that is there's no clear end in sight to the war. Right? We can talk about whether there will be some peace settlement by the end of the year, or whether all sides are in it to win it. I think from the United States' perspective, we're making money off of this war. I mean, it's the reason why Zelensky is heralded as this paragon of democratic virtue in Washington, because he's making a whole bunch of our politicians rich, right? And this is the first outsourced war. This is truly the first outsourced war. So we have absolutely nothing to lose. Lindsey Graham can look like a ghoul on TV with, licking his lips saying, we love killing Russians and we'll fight to the last Ukrainian, because he has nothing to lose as well. As far as Russia is concerned, their official objective is to ensure Ukraine's neutrality and also denazify the country, which is a very open-ended term because that effectively means taking over the entire country. But as far as reaching any definitive military objective, I think we've already discussed this within the group, that Odessa seems to be really what I would call, the boss fights. I mean, this is really the end goal here. If Russia is able to take Odessa, which of course means that they will have regained the offensive, gone on a second counteroffensive, retake Kherson. If they take Odessa, yes, I agree with Alex that it is, it's a one-way road to Transnistria. But the more important thing, by taking Odessa, Russia controls Ukraine's Black Sea coast, and by that matter, has a significant control, if not outward monopoly, over Ukraine's economy. As far as Ukraine is concerned, I mean, this is a total war of survival. So for them, the war became that when Russia intervened, when Russia invaded last February, not simply to occupy the Donbas region to get Kiev government to sign the Minsk Accords, but by recognizing the independence of the Donbas and Lugansk Republic. So now we are playing with another country's sovereignty. We're violating another country's territorial integrity, which abrogates any reason for Ukraine to negotiate at all, considering that Russia then added to that by including Zaporozhye and Kherson, and there's no reason to doubt that they will look to incorporate the same thing with Odessa. Which leads me to the third one, and I think we all agree, it's a proxy war. I mean, I think that anybody who doesn't agree with that now is either woefully ignorant or just knows something that the rest of us don't. But because the war is being fought largely between NATO on one side, really the US and the UK, through NATO on one side, Russia on the other, and the fact that Russia has not gone through general mobilization just yet, but most of their fighting forces tend to be voluntary. So you have army groups, Z, V, and O, you have Wagner, PMC, we haven't brought those up, but these are effectively mercenaries, these are soldiers of fortune. Plus we also have conscripted prisoners that was very effective to for Wagner in the beginning part. So this isn't one of those cases where for Russia it's a war in which everybody will be mobilized like the Second World War. So you can still outsource and you can still privatize the military conflict while gaining pot shots here and there in the comment sections on social media sites. The fourth, and this is something that we really need to discuss, is that the war is being fueled by two industrial complexes. We've talked about the military industrial complex, but we need to recognize the worst kept secret, and that is the media industrial complex, right? The media industrial complex, corporate media in the United States, which likes to think of itself as independent because we're not state media. Corporate media is just as propagandistic as anything else. And I'm not singling out any news sites or any news channel, but Western media is all in on the narrative that Russia unjustly, unprovoked, and illegally invaded another country. And I mean, in many cases, Russia took the bait. When one country invades another, right? The narrative in the West is very, very simple. Germany invades Poland, Iraq invades Kuwait, Russia invades Ukraine, right? We support the underdog against the big bully. Forget the fact, and this does not justify Russia's invasion, but forget the fact that Russia had no choice. Forget the fact that NATO has its own interests and investments within Ukraine. Forget the fact that Minsk II was completely ignored. Forget the Bucharest conference in 2007, 2008, if I'm not mistaken, which envisioned NATO expanding to include countries like Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. Forget the idea that even as late as December 2021, Putin wanted to sit down with Western leaders and hash out some kind of agreement in which Ukraine would be militarily neutral. All of this is lost, right? All of this is conveniently left out of the narrative. And, as an academic, I want to bring up what we're talking about when we say narrative, because it's a term that we throw around a lot, but there is meaning to that, because a narrative, and here is my own academic definition, is a conscious connection of previously unstructured and possibly even unrelated events, figures, and ideas into a seemingly imploded framework of logic and reference. That's the story. That's the pitch that is used, and it oftentimes is disguised as journalism. And there's a big difference between journalism and narrative. Journalism highlights the inconvenient truths. Narrative gets you to agree with the story. And oftentimes the narrative is accompanied with symbols, and symbols function as the tools of narrative, both tangible, as in the form of monuments, commemorations, and rituals, and intangible, such as feelings of belonging, patriotism, or tradition. So these are the characters, the props, the special effects, the direction that goes into this. And a large part of that symbolism in Western media is not just Russia, but Russophobia. It is the one acceptable form of xenophobia and racism. Russophobia is something that is used to blame everything and anything, right? Guy that you didn't want gets elected, blame it on Russia. Economic problems, blame it on Russia. The sanctions that are not working, backfires on Europe, blame it on Russia. It was supposed to rain today, but it's not. Damn you, Putin, right? Something like that. And so the media industrial complex, particularly in the US, the UK, I think, is probably the most egregious out of all of this. We've heard stories about Putin being on his last legs. He's dying, he's sick, he has cancer, Russia's about to collapse. You all remember sometime over the summer, Prigozhin's little coup d'etat, worst insurrection ever. And yet, Western media literally stopped reporting on the war in Ukraine to see what was going to happen in Russia. And then all of a sudden, nothing. Lukashenko gives a call to Prigozhin, conveys an offer that he literally cannot refuse from Putin. And, that's it, right? I mean, that's basically it. Anybody who's been following this would realize that, you don't just simply drive to Moscow expecting to take over. But Western media thought, well, that's it. That's it. Russia's done. This country is just basically one big Potemkin village. And then, oops, right? This is kind of the thing, is that predictions don't match up with realities. And I think a lot of that also goes to the fifth inconvenient truth, and that is the sanctions are not working. We expected Russia to economically fold. And I think that one very important thing, and by the way, as we are having this webinar right now, the BRICS summit is convening in South Africa. And this is a big one. As soon as this is done, as soon as I'm done teaching my class, I'm going to go and translate Putin's address. And I guarantee you, Lavrov will be having a press conference out there.
Thank you already for that.
And the reason why I do this is very simple. I don't have any stock in this stuff, but I was amazed that you will only get little snippets of statements coming from Putin, Lavrov, and it usually is, the juicy ones where, it's the Khrushchev banging the shoe on the podium saying, we will bury you. But we never really hear anything before or after. So the reason why I do this on my page is just simply primary source material, right? Take it as you want. I don't put any commentary. I don't give my own opinion. I let the comments just go the way that they do. But that certainly has blown up my page's subscription amount, just simply because I can't believe that I'm some academic that, is just doing this in his, spare time. But, the sanctions are clearly not working. Russia has managed to, I would say, engage quite successfully in import substitution, but has also was thrown a lifeline, I think, early on by India. We have to regard India, not just China, but India is a country that was willing to purchase Russian gas, Russian fuel through the ruble, which the ruble isn't doing as good as it was a couple of months ago, but the ruble has not crashed. And so the idea that Russia has been able to pivot in what we call the West versus the rest, this is effectively the long-term thing, right? Russia is in this both militarily in Ukraine as well as diplomatically. Russia does not do speed run. Russia does long play, right? Russia is in it for the long haul here. And that's where the sixth inconvenient truth is probably the most bleak, and that is Ukraine's future is just disastrous. Like I don't know what Ukraine will look like territorially. I don't know what it will look like. Militarily, it relies entirely on the West to keep itself alive for 2 weeks. Economically, we're not giving these weapons to Ukraine. We're selling them. We're lending money to it. I don't know how much in debt Ukraine is, and this is perfect for the United States because, anybody who is on the winning side of a game of Monopoly is, you land on my boardwalk with a hotel on it. Well, that's $2,000, pay up. Well, you don't have it, start mortgaging stuff, start selling off your assets. I mean, this is, I just don't see Ukraine as holding any kind of sovereign agency after this. And politically, there is an article written a couple of months, actually right around the time of the anniversary, by Branko Marcetic, who published this in Jacobin magazine. So it's a brilliant, brilliant piece, who looks at the deteriorating state of democratic affairs in the country. We talked, Alex, you talked about the Russian-speaking minority being targeted. I mean, we are effectively canceling Russian culture. And we're not just simply removing Soviet-era monuments, but we are removing monuments to Pushkin or Catherine the Great, or even Yuri Gagarin, for some strange reason, is now seen as dangerous to Ukrainian identity. And, this just pushes the Russian-speaking community not so much into the hands of Russia, but looks at the Russian forces not as occupiers, but as liberators. And, if the new narrative of what it means to be Ukrainian is basically the glorification of wartime collaborators in the Second World War, I'd like to think that there's got to be something other than Stepan Bandera for a Ukrainian to feel proud about. But the far right has just been given complete carte blanche in Ukrainian society today. And the United States turns a blind eye and a deaf ear to all of this. So what Ukraine will look like afterwards may be this rump, impoverished, xenophobic state that is just utterly dependent on the West, including the United States and Poland. The seventh inconvenient truth is that China is siding with Russia. So instead of isolating Russia, the emerging economic giant is moving closer and closer to Russia. Now, they're not in any military alliance, but the fact that they are working not just through BRICS, but through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian European Union. Russia is a major contributor and supporter of China's One Belt, One Road policy, leads us to believe that the United States is really picking a fight with two of the other global powers. And, we can certainly talk about multipolarism here, but the United States seems to be not building walls around Russia, but building walls around its own transatlantic network of states, while the Russians and the Chinese are working to solidify and expand partnership and cooperation with other emerging economies. The eighth inconvenient truth is that the Westphalian system is under attack. And this is one of the cornerstones of not only modern diplomacy, but one of the basic foundations of international relations studies, and that is the territorial integrity of countries should not be touched, right? The UN Charter basically says border changes are a thing of the past. And yet it's not Ukraine that broke the mold, but Kosovo. And, Russia brings up the Kosovo precedents all the time, to which the United States will just dismiss that and say that doesn't count, or that's a special case, right? That's kind of like the second grade dismissal on the playground saying, well, that doesn't count because it's mine, not yours type of thing, right? But, Alex, you brought up this idea that NATO's first military intervention was the bombardment of Serbia, Yugoslavia in 1999. And look, you can say whatever you want about the crackdown on, in Kosovo itself, but was Kosovo supposed to be detached from Serbia, right? And you can make all kinds of agreements to reattach it, full autonomy, this, that, the other thing. You could say, look, we've passed that point now. In that regard, if the United States can effectively violate the territorial integrity of one country, Russia can do that to Ukraine and Georgia. China can do that with Taiwan. India could do that. Iran could do that, right? It sort of opens up the floodgates here, in which any kind of negotiated settlement may have to include ceding territory to Russia. And how much is that going to be? Ukraine was already absolutely against this, simply because the Minsk II agreements did not include Crimea, right? And Ukraine still talks about liberating Crimea, taking it back. I don't know how they're going to do that. Again, I'm not a military analyst, but I find it increasingly unlikely that will become a thing. The ninth inconvenient truth is that liberalism, the international relations model of liberalism, is failing from its own self-inflicted wounds. Now, Jason, you just brought up the infamously famous and famously infamous Professor John Mearsheimer, who is really, the stalwart for realism. I identify more so as a constructivist, and I like constructivism because it takes the ideas of realism but adds a little bit more explanation, human agency, historical subjectivity to it. But one of the biggest elements about liberalism's weakness is that it claims to speak on behalf of individual universal rights, democracy, freedom, and yet liberalism, especially when it comes as a United States foreign policy, is selective. Right? We give a damn only about human rights violations where the area is convenient. And then suddenly, when it's no longer convenient for us, like it was in Afghanistan, we pull out, we don't talk about Afghanistan anymore. Taliban are right back where they were 20 years ago. And now we're supposed to worry about Ukraine. Beforehand, we were supposed to worry about Syria. We don't really care about Libya. We don't care about Yemen. We don't care about Myanmar, right? You get the idea here. So at the end of the day, I do agree with one of the things that Mearsheimer argues, and that is liberalism is little more than an ethos to explain one's own power politics. And this is something that can be elucidated more so through constructivism, because the United States, like any other country, perceives countries to be a certain thing, right? Russia is perceived to be an aggressor. China is perceived to be an economic rival. Saudi Arabia, one of the worst human rights records in the world, buddy-buddy with the United States, right? We really don't care. When was the last time we're going to bring up the problem of human rights in Saudi Arabia? We're not, because they're economic allies to us. And you can, list them off as you go here. And, I think that is a way for me to end at the 10th one. The 10th inconvenient truth out of all of this is that here we are, late August 2021. As we're having this conversation, BRICS is having its summit. There are about 20 to 25 countries that have expressed interest in joining BRICS. We are talking more and more about the notion of de-dollarization. We are talking about a multipolar world, which Putin mentions, Lavrov mentions. Again, somebody in the Russian government has access to a JSTOR account because they're reading academia, and I'm very happy about that. But what they imply with multipolarism is that the United States will remain a major power in the world, but it is no longer the only power. And it needs to share the space with other regional powers, like the Chinese, the Russians, the Indians, the Iranians, the Brazilians, among others. And I think that the US just seems woefully unprepared for this new multipolar world that it finds itself in. Our leaders still seem to think it's 1996. That's because our leaders are in their 80s. So for them, right, you can't say that America is no longer the shining light on the hill, because that just simply goes against their own programming. And those that do are just simply anti-American. They're pro-Russian. And it just kind of kills any credible discussion. It has nothing to do with being anti-American. In fact, it would probably be even more pro-American to realize what our capabilities are and what we need to do in this present day. I want to finish out by just saying that, and again, I'm not in any way, shape, or form condoning what Russia has done, but the fact that we constantly fail to read Russia the right way has led us to where we are. And I think a lot of this has to do with Russophobia. And it's not a throwaway statement. It's not just simply of saying, you know, America hates Russia. I think that it's just a prolonged, sustained misunderstanding of Russia. Before Putin became public enemy number one, especially within the first 2 years, the first 2 terms of his presidency, he wanted to reach out to the United States constantly to work with them. But the difference is that unlike Yeltsin, who saw the US as the big brother, and we kind of looked at Yeltsin as that stumbling, bumbling, but lovable, huggable, buffoonish type of character, Putin doesn't do this. Putin wants to meet and treat on equal terms. And that is something that, unfortunately, a lot of war hawks in Washington just don't want to do. So in that regard, I think that as long as we continue to misunderstand Russia, as long as we ban Russian media, ban Russian journalists, and as long as we continue to have that wall of ignorance between us, we are going to just simply look at the conflict in Ukraine through our own sanitized narratives as we're the good guys defending the little guy against the Russian horde. And every time that a small settlement is retaken, no matter how it's a Pyrrhic victory, Prigozhin at one point said, every day, the number of Ukrainians that replenish the field exactly replace the number of people that were killed the previous day. I mean, it's a meat grinder. And this is something that is only now heading into, media headlines. We're going to continue to think that we're winning. And when the war reaches some kind of frozen conflict, some kind of stalemate, we're going to wonder what happened. So, but I'll end it there.
Thank you very much, Mike. That is certainly a testament to you being a professor. Too many things to talk about to fit into such a short amount of time, but you definitely tried, and it was very valuable in my opinion. Lots of different points were touched upon, and each of them in a easy to understand manner that will definitely open up further discussion. I will do the same as with the other speakers. Brian, do you have any questions for Michael?
So it was a very good presentation, all encompassing. And I'm just wondering what your opinion might be on this aspect. When Russia goes into Ukraine, it's very easy for the Western media to say, this is one country going into the territory of another country, violating Ukraine's sovereignty. It's very obvious. It's not a hard argument to make, but I just wonder if you agree with the idea that when the United States goes into a country without tanks, without their military, they go in with these NGOs, the National Endowment for Democracy, Victoria Nuland and her bag of cookies. They're essentially doing the exact same thing. They are politically capturing a country. They are removing one government and installing another. For all intents and purposes, it is the exact same thing, only through different means. So would it be fair to say that Ukraine's sovereignty was stripped from it in 2014? Obviously, what Russia is doing now could be perceived as a further violation, especially of territorial integrity. But would it be fair to say that in 2014, Ukraine's sovereignty, for the most part, ceased to exist?
I would go even further back and say 2008 with the Yushchenko government. That was really the first. That was really the first time to do so. You're absolutely right. I mean, pick your type of intervention. You have hard physical intervention like what Russia is doing here, which again, the United States is no stranger to this. We have intervened in Iraq, we've intervened in Afghanistan, but what the United States does is it makes a beeline for the capital, right? It goes right for the capital, decapitates the leadership, and then spends the next 20 years trying to pacify the regions through its own fortified green zone. Whereas Russia maybe tried to do that in the beginning, didn't do that. Now it's just going village by village by village. What the US does, you're absolutely right, with NGOs and other kinds of soft power, right? There's a excellent book by Joseph Nye that talks about this, the role of soft power. It's sort of a way of, if you can't win the hearts and minds of the ordinary people, get compliant elements of the corrupt leadership. And let's be perfectly honest here, Ukraine has been grotesquely corrupt since the 1990s. I really get annoyed when people think that Ukraine is the shining democracy on the hill that's defending the world against, the tyranny. I'm just like, this is the narrative. Right? This is the narrative. And if all you do is read the New York Times op-ed section, yeah, that's what you're going to believe. But, Ukrainian officials can be easily bought off. Victoria Nuland, she doesn't buy them off with cookies. She certainly buys them off with, lucrative arrangements and, political immunities and things like that. Yeah, absolutely. So, this whole idea of Ukraine not having its own autonomous agency is something that has been around for at least a decade, if not more.
Thank you.
Nice. Jason, do you have any questions for Michael? I think you unmuted yourself for a second and then muted yourself again.
Yeah, I think that's a very good presentation. I have no question. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And Alex, you have your chance to start a debate again. But please don't.
Remember, I got to teach in about 15 minutes here.
No, fantastic presentation, Michael. Wow, what an education that was. Thank you. This one's an easy one. What flag will the world put on their profile once they've taken the Ukraine flag off? Let's say, what is the flag of choice, or the country that everybody will be running to its defense with sympathy around the world? What's the next flag that's going to go up?
What's the next flag hashtag, huh?
Yeah.
Well, again, I really hope that this is not the case, because if it is, we're in for some serious trouble. The Taiwanese flag.
Okay.
I would say. There is this coup going on in Niger right now. No one's really talking about it simply because it's West Central Africa. No one really knows about it. No one really cares about it. ECOWAS is this organization that really is a legacy of French colonialism that is threatening to intervene and topple the coup government and put the previous president back in. Macron only cares about this. He doesn't care that there's a coup that happened. He just cares that France does not get cheap uranium anymore. And the idea that, guess who is in Niger now? Prigozhin. He just emerged out of his summer vacation and is setting up Wagner camps there to effectively.
Daddy's back, he said.
Yes, he's back. Again, he's Here's the thing, Putin doesn't get rid of rivals. He buys them, right? He buys them. In order to understand Russia, the one thing I got out of this coup d'etat that came out of this whole thing is that you got to look at Russia not as a modern state, it's an empire, right? Russia is an empire. Russia operates like an empire. And it also operates along the lines of the way any good organized crime syndicate operates. And I'm not saying that Putin's a godfather or a don or any of that kind of stereotypical stuff, but you make deals, you make offers, you flex, you maneuver, you don't eliminate if you can find a use for. And it's something happened earlier, I think in the 2000s. One of Putin's strongest supporters in Russia today is a man by the name of Ramzan Kadyrov. I'm sure you all know who he is. He is effectively the one who runs Chechnya. Chechnya is now the safest place in all of Russia. But it's very similar to saying that in the 1960s and 70s, Ozone Park, Brooklyn was the safest place because it was run by the mafia. Putin effectively purchases. He secures the loyalty of people. Prigozhin may very well have tested that, tried to show his mettle, and was given a separate offer. So, I'm kind of deterring from your initial question here, Alex, but Niger might be something that we may think of, but it's not in the news. We don't care about Africa, unfortunately, right? They have to be topical places. So Taiwan could possibly be, unless something happens with Moldova or Georgia, for that matter, again. Maybe even the Baltics. I don't know. I don't foresee Russian military going into the Baltic for one very simple reason. The Baltics are NATO countries. They can easily invoke Article 5. That we don't want to do. Moldova, different story.
Yeah. I'm agreeing with you on Moldova there. And my dark horse bet is on Estonia.
The thing we need to know about the Baltics is that they, along with Poland, are probably the most hawkish out of all of the NATO members. Mm-hmm. They have been pushing for greater intervention, to which even the United States is saying, hold up, hang on, we don't want World War III. We can contain this through the proxy war in Ukraine. Let's, again, it's not even the Baltics. You got to look for Poland as well. Poland is emerging as the largest military. And let me also throw this one in. Ukraine means nothing to NATO. Ukraine means absolutely nothing. Notice that within the last year and a half, NATO has expanded. It has included Finland and coming soon, Sweden, whenever Turkey decides that Sweden is stopping burning Korans or whatever it is, right? But I want you to envision the map of Europe. And NATO has now succeeded in creating this north-south barrier from Finland through the Baltics, through Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and even Turkey. That is the wall between East and West. Whatever happens to Ukraine, and this is I know it's a dark thing to say, that is inconsequential to NATO. Some people think that by losing the war, NATO will disband. My prediction is that NATO won't disband, but what they will do is realize that all of these NATO countries have now eliminated their cobweb-filled stockpile warehouses of hand-me-downs from the Cold War, to which who comes in? Our good friends at Raytheon and McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed Martin, BlackRock, and says, y'all need new weapons. What NATO will effectively do is now be, militarily up to date, enough to create a new Cold War, a new regionalized bipolar dichotomy between Europe, which is the EU is effectively going to become the economic wing of NATO, and NATO is America's military appendage within Europe. Whether Ukraine enters or not, again, Borrell at one point, no, Stoltenberg at one point said, Ukraine, this is a cool one, Ukraine will enter NATO. Ukraine will gain NATO membership after it defeats Russia on the battlefield. Again, with friends like these, all right, I'm done.
Wonderful, thank you. That is so good. Your entire presentation was really valuable, Mike. Thank you. I'm gonna take, before you leave, 2 minutes to stand on my own soapbox, because there's a subject that I've been brooding on for 11 years. Back then, I was working as a strategist in corporate strategy for major energy businesses as an intern initially. And back then, even back then, in 2011, 12, and 13, and 14, we had very deep insights into US geostrategy and how it will affect our energy business in Europe. I'm going to read a note from 2013, and I would like to get your opinion on this. And I'm going to simultaneously translate this as I go along. So this is the summarized notes for a presentation. I'm translating from German to English. Point number 1, and this was in present tense, I'm translating it to past tense now. Point 1, the US deliberately manufactured the political situation in Ukraine, which is an extended color revolution with several parts, and purposely thought to stoke ethnic tensions and split the country to incite a civil war. Point number 2, the immediate goal was to eradicate pro-Russians and ethnic Russians from the mainstream political establishment and turn Ukraine into an explicitly anti-Russian country from a political perspective. Point number 3, over the years 2013 and 14, that was already a prediction about the future. The Americans will complete their full destabilization of the Ukrainian political establishment and start their takeover of the Ukrainian government using US assets that will be then taking direct control. Point number 4, either this will lead to Crimea being taken from Russia. That was back then like a prediction. This will, using the same modus operandi the US used in Syria to take Tartus and the Golan Heights from Russia. That would already be a best case scenario, because that would take Russia's last warm water port from them. And then the next point was, alternatively, Russia will decide to annex Crimea one way or another, either through democratic elections, can't translate it, or military takeover, learning from their military, from their experience in Syria. This would be annoying to the United States, as it leaves Russia with a warm water port, but would enable the US to escalate things into an international conflict more quickly, because this is also one of their goals back then. Next point, the ethnic tensions and the ensuing civil war related to those ethnic tensions in eastern Ukraine, alongside NATO expansion threats, will provoke Russia into an international war. This is good from the perspective of the US, because the US will use it to split the EU and Russia apart, politically and economically. Splitting apart, like next point, splitting apart Russia and the EU, more specifically Russia and Germany, is a necessary step to subjugate the EU energetically and economically. 8th point, this in turn is a requirement for keeping NATO alive and relevant, and Europe compliant with US foreign policy. Next point is the ultimate goal on all of those activities in Europe was the creation of a frozen conflict in Ukraine, meaning Ukraine was to be turned into a European Korea. That's what they said back in 2013, to semi-permanently split Eurasia into East and West. This is the ultimate definition of a win for the United States, as this will result in the destruction of the EU economy to a large degree, as well as the killing of many Russians, and therefore weakening of the Russian military threat, which will be a potential cherry on top. And then the 10th and last point of this summary that was provided to a CEO of an energy business I work for. 10th, this in turn is considered a necessary requirement for attacking and containing China via proxy warfare, not just because of military capabilities related to the strengthening of NATO, but also because of the economic pressure that NATO membership will exert on all of the European countries deciding to enter NATO, that will be moved to decouple from China in case of a US-caused proxy war. This is the actual long-term plan. Yeah, and that ends the notes. So back in 2013, these were the predictions made by European energy businesses, and I know that these notes come from Goldman Sachs, in part, consultants that cost thousands of dollars that apparently have insights per day, that apparently have deeper insights in the US establishment, into the US establishment. My big question is, if, and most of this has actually become true, if this is already in place as a plan since at least 2013, which is when I got these notes, was there even any way to stop this war? Or was this always a thing that is definitely going to happen? And how can you even prevent such a thing?
I mean, you know, the Marxist in me is coming out now because it's not a surprise that this comes from Goldman Sachs. It's you know, the financial wing of the American empire kind of predicts this, and they're not interested as far as the consequences. You know, good luck in doing this. I think, and I'll be very, very quick because I do have to run and I do have to teach it's my first day anyway. So they're going to wonder, you know, where the hell I am. So, but first of all, color revolutions. Color revolutions are not necessarily instigated from the outside. Color revolutions begin as actual, genuine citizen grievances against the collectively perceived dysfunctionality, ineptitude, and utter corruption of their respective governments. So what makes the revolutions color revolutions is that they tend to be branded and corporatized by outside funding, outside support, whether it's NGOs, whether it is, you know, whether US aid or whatever element about that. And it kind of shifts I wouldn't even say a revolution, but it shifts the opposition towards choosing an alternative group of leaders that aren't necessarily interested in better democracy and good governance so much as they are just finding compliant pro-Western leaders. I mean, that's ultimately, at the end of the day, for American foreign policy, we're not interested in a government that's pro-democratic. We want one that's pro-Western. If you are pro-democratic while being pro-Western, bonus points. But if you have to be one or the other, it's pro-Western. And then we'll worry about, you know, sort of democracy afterwards. But you absolutely have to be pro-democratic because you are inherently pro-Western. The second thing is that it may very well have foreseen that in the following decade or so, there was going to be a necessary confrontation with Russia and China for, again, one very important reason: to solidify and entrench the gains in the regions that one already has. Take a look at where NATO is right now. NATO, people are saying, are more united than ever. Yes, within NATO's membership. Ukraine is the sacrificial lamb that gave NATO Finland and eventually Sweden. And it's going to be very, very difficult for countries like Austria and Ireland and, you know, even Serbia down the road to continue to maintain this element of neutrality. I think a third thing is, you know, if we are in a multipolar world right now, that means that we are in a post-unipolar world. And that means that the United States is like, you know, the heavyweight champion from 5 years ago that lives on legacy, right? Or the movie star from the silent film generation that just can't make it into the talkies. You know, whatever it happens to be, right? It's the person that never peaked beyond high school and keeps going to their high school homecoming game every year, reminding people that are young enough to be their grandchildren, you know, I was the quarterback of my high school in 1970. Who gives a damn? Okay. And, you know, it's like the US is running on this legacy of no. We really want to bring back our position, I think, from the 90s and even the early 2000s. And if that means being antagonistic towards rising challengers, then so be it. The thing is that the literature on unipolarism argues, this is very, very clear on this, unipolarism sows the seeds of its own demise. And unipolar powers don't last long. Eventually new powers rise, not because of anything sinister, but just because things just happen. A unipolar power can do one of two things. It can be a benign hegemon, in which case it maintains leverage through economic links and soft power politics, or it can be a hard hegemon, in which it uses a military to effectively remind people who is more powerful. The United States has gotten black eye after black eye since the war on terror. And so, the State Department and the Pentagon and Victoria Nuland and Joe Biden and John Bolton will, kind of present the US in this brochure that makes it look all wonderful. And around the world, people are saying, well, I don't read New York Times anymore. I don't read the Washington Post. I don't watch MSNBC. I don't do CNN. I have social media. I have Telegram channels. And that's not to say that they are the voice of truth, but they give us things that we don't get from, independent journalism in the West. So this is something that I'm happy to talk to you about at a later point.
Yes, absolutely. Let's continue this at another day. Actually, one last question. Do you even believe, yes or no, there is a way for China to stop a potential conflict with the United States that the United States is somehow working towards?
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of it has to do more so with the United States. We can talk a lot, but do we have the capability? Will we actually militarily and go all in on Taiwan? I mean, is it worth it? And
I would argue it will probably be a proxy war. The US will not get involved directly.
It may be a proxy war. If we can outsource this, fine. But geopolitics really hinges on election seasons. It's amazing. Let's see what happens next year. I know that we've already talked about this idea of if Trump gets elected again, that's a whole different ballgame, at least as far as Russia is concerned. So anyways, gentlemen, I do need to run, but thank you all for the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike.
This was great. As soon as the video is up, I will post it to my page and share it, throughout.
Thank you. See you next time.
Okay.
We will definitely do this again with you.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Thank
you all.
you
Thank
so
you all very much.
Mike.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Cool. What about the others? Brian, Alex, Jason, do you want to continue taking questions from the audience or anybody else?
I'm okay.
Yeah, I'm
do that.
okay.
Yeah. Let's say, I want to ask a question. Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
For you guys. So if I may, I can share my screen. So actually, my question is, since I'm Chinese, from my Chinese perspective, I don't understand what United States is thinking. So this country, Uzbekistan, and do you guys know that this year we signed China signed an agreement that they will build a high-speed railway to this country, and this is the Belt and Road Initiative that we Chinese want to do for a long time. Who stop us? Russia, because Russia don't want us Chinese to get into Middle Asia. And thanks to United States help, now they are pushing Russia to China, and we are able to build this railway. And I read the book from Brzezinski, and it's a never let Russia, Iran, and China to be allies. This is like the very simple ideas that the geopoliticians are thinking, right? But now what I see is that United States is pushing Russia towards China. So I don't quite understand what the United States is thinking. So from my perspective, so I'm asking from your perspective, what do you guys think about this?
Brian, do you want to start?
Sure. I think it has to do with the United States running out of time. They had this plan after the fall of the Soviet Union to sweep away all of its client regimes, all of its allies, conduct regime change. We remember General Wesley Clark talking about 7 nations in 7 years. They didn't even come close to doing that in 7 years. It's still uncompleted to this very day. So you have that, You have the fact that Russia is reemerging. You have the fact that China is rising so quickly, so powerfully. Its impact along its periphery, its ability to build infrastructure, to drive trade and economic development, so powerful, so compelling that the US doesn't have the ability to convince or even coerce nations into staying the course as being subordinated to the US. They are running out of time to contain Russia and China, and they're making very bad decisions. And these decisions are compounding the crisis that they are in. In reality, there is no actual crisis. The United States can be a constructive member among all other nations through multipolarism, but in their mindset there in Washington and on Wall Street, that is inconceivable. So they're going to continue pursuing unipolarism, no matter how little sense it makes, no matter how poorly their plans are going, they're going to continue pushing it. And I think we will just see this compound year by year. It'll get worse and worse. And people will ask the question, what are they thinking? And I think it is the reality that imperialism is more like a tropism, and there really isn't a lot of thinking going on fundamentally.
Alex looks like he's about to burst, or what was that expression?
So Jason, thank you for that, Brian. Thank you. So Jason, your question was kind of focused in on the Belt Road Initiative, the BRI, and America kind of putting China against Russia, or saying that they're at difference on this, correct?
Well, I think thanks to United States, the Chinese are able to build this high-speed railway, and the United States is pushing Russia towards China. So I find it very strange for the United States to doing this.
Okay, so let's look at why the United States would do that. First of all, they had their built back, and I think Brian's heard this many times, but I call it the Build Back Bankrupt, the BBB, which the Biden administration tried to push through for economic development and bridging countries together with America to compete against the Belt Road Initiative. It failed. So they feel that possibly Russia could be a liability for China, which is actually the opposite. You know, this year, coming October, is the 10th anniversary of the Belt Road Initiative, which has successfully signed up 152 countries worldwide. And if you notice around the time when the anniversary comes around October, that is the day that Putin is scheduled to come to China. And we have to look at it from a way where the Americans, they don't look at the same Russia as maybe this panel does. They look at Russia as this old, depleted country, you know, with the population in decline. They look at the artillery that, well, basically, I would say they underestimated Russia on the battlefield. And I think Brian has proved that many times during his live streams with me. But you see, it's usually the easiest way to take out the biggest competitor is to pit somebody else against them. And that's what they've done in the Ukraine, where they want Russia gone. Ukraine definitely cannot handle it. Let's do the proxy and bring in the NATO countries to do the fighting, and using the Ukrainian soldiers as the casualties. But, you know, here I'm going to answer a question with another question. We keep saying that, you know, we would never, and I say we as in Russia, would never go in and strike a NATO country. Why not? Do we actually think that the Russians that have risked their economy, their 140 million population, has managed to stand behind their leader? And this is a country that has, you know, over 6,200 nuclear warheads. It would not surprise me if a mistake, and maybe Brian can help out with this one here, it would not surprise me that a mistake on NATO countries' part in the next 6 months could trigger something that even the Americans would be their, you know, one of their wildest dreams. total anarchy in Europe, it could be a false flag. It could be something bringing Belarus into this. There's a reason why Belarus has got nuclear warheads on their territory now. We cannot underestimate a country like Russia that has, during Soviet times, taken on 27 million in casualties. The Hollywood movie theaters will never make a movie of the amount of sacrifices the Soviet Union did in World War II. No, we don't see any movies in our Hollywood studios about it, because that is something history has forgotten. But the average Russian person, the people that are in control of that country, they understand what this is all about. And this whole push by NATO in Ukraine, whether we like it or not, if you attack one, you attack us all. Russia's not, I don't think, Brian, maybe you can help me with this. I do not think for 1 second Russia even is remotely concerned on any of these NATO countries, because they've been fighting them for the last 18 months. So that's where I'm going to maybe hand it over to someone else. Thank you.
Brian, do you want to comment on this, or are you agreeing with Alex?
Yeah, so I would say that Russia would prefer not to get into a direct conflict with all of NATO, but I think it is obvious that NATO's military might has been hyped, and it is not what it's advertised to be.
Yeah. Brian, can I ask you one thing? Can I ask you just one thing, Brian?
Sure.
Did you ever think that Russia would have gone in when they did? Because I didn't think they would do it at all.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people were taken by surprise regarding all of this. But then again, people were surprised when they went into Syria. And then they were also surprised when they reacted the way they did to Georgia attacking them in 2008. So it was from 2008 onward, that was a message to the West that they have drawn a red line and they were not going to accept anything further. And they have held true to that up until today.
900,000 ethnic Russians in the Baltic states. That's a number that can't be ignored.
I definitely did not get any surprise out of this attack because, as I mentioned, since 2013, European energy businesses were talking about this definitely happening and were preparing for it already, which is crazy to think about. Jason, I have an opinion actually on your question. I think there are 3 points playing into why the US is choosing to push Russia and China together. It's not like they want this to happen. It's just, in their opinion, from their view, their best strategic choice. So I will mention 3 points that play into this. The first thing is, on one hand, Russia has infinite resources and all countries want them. Russia is an infinite resource tank. Anything you want, Russia probably has it somewhere lying around in its massive territory. So everybody wants to trade with Russia. On the other hand, it's also a nuclear power. So you cannot just take those resources because you will get nuked. You cannot realistically invade and take over parts of Russia. Russia will literally destroy you and everyone on this planet if you try. So the only country that does have a realistic choice of ever invading parts of Russia is China itself, another nuclear power that is bordering Russia and could send troops right over, take parts of Siberia, whatever. But China is also the most peaceful country on earth. So the US knows China would not attack Russia without being attacked by Russia first or being forced in any other way by Russia to attack. So the US has, in my personal opinion, already acknowledged that they cannot reasonably control or make use of Russian resources. They can only stop the flow of Russian resources to other nations. And the reality when it comes to stopping those flows to other nations is that they can never stop the flows to China, because Russia and China share a small land border. and they can definitely always train and will defend that border against foreign intervention. So when you look at this, Russia is a big resource basket. What are the options? Either you keep Russia, you keep friendly terms with China and keep Russia and China apart. You focus on this, but then Russia will do everything it can to make peace and sell to Europe. So the better choice from the US perspective is actually to choose to continue its vassalization of Europe, which will force Russia to sell to China. The US will never be able to control both sides. Either Russia will sell to Europe or Russia will sell to China. These are the options, and the US cannot control both sides. So the US has decided it will, rather than to try and control everybody, they will focus on controlling Europe and split the world into East and West to make sure that the resource flows to the West stop and Russia is forced to sell to the East. I think this is just the US cutting its strategic losses and saying Russia and China are a better match than Europe and Russia, because if you listen to George Friedman on this, it's another strategist like John Mearsheimer that you might know. George Friedman predicted all the way, I think in 2007 or so, Europe is destined for conflict. And the most important strategic objective of the United States in Europe is to split Russia and Germany apart, because a unison of German political control in Europe, as well as know-how and manufacturing base, matched with Russian resources, such an alliance would be an even bigger threat to US domination of the world than just the rising China. So I believe this is just US cutting its losses, deciding Russia-China alliance is preferable over EU-Russia alliance. And I think what plays into this as a second point is that Russia is a capitalist, highly religious country with highly conservative people that have a very strong national identity. On the other hand, you have China, which is a socialist country, very atheistic, non-religious, anti-religious even, at the very least its government. The Communist Party does not accept membership of religious people. And of course, they are racially, culturally, ethnically different. So the US probably thinks it's easier to split Russia and China at a later date apart than it will be to split Europe and Russia apart if they ever form an alliance, because Europeans are ethnically, racially, culturally more aligned with Russia than the Chinese. So I think this is why the US is choosing to allow Russia and China to come together. Sorry for taking my soapbox.
Oh, that's a very good sharing. Thank you for saying that.
Yes. So actually, China Academy, are there any questions from the China Academy audience?
No more?
No more questions. Everything was answered. I can see your list, and we actually asked all of those questions that you sent. Yes. Cool. I think then this has come to a very good conclusion. Unfortunately, I took the long last few minutes to soapbox my own opinions on stuff, even though I'm not a guest. I'm very sorry about this. You can cut this out of the recording later. I want to thank all of our guests that are still here. So Alex, Brian, and Jason for joining today. Your input was very valuable. I would like to request the entire audience of this event to please subscribe to all of them. Make sure to like and comment their videos, to subscribe to their channels, watch through their videos and support them, because they took their time of the day to talk to you and bring you these valuable insights. This was a fantastic event, in my opinion. Many valuable opinions were shared, and we brought some audiences together of different people from different parts of the world. And I hope to see you all again. Thank you very much.
1 second, please. I
Oh,
want to
wow.
take the chance. Sorry, hi guys. This is Wenqing from China Academy. I'm here all the time, and I want to thank you, let's say, for organizing this fabulous event together. Thank you, Alex, Brian, Jason, and already left Michael together. Our team is gonna be responsible for putting the recordings sent to you guys, and we will put into live. Some of them we may translate into Chinese and broadcasting into 1.5 million fans across the platforms of ours. So thank you again for your time and contributions. Thank you especially to, let's say, for organizing this beautiful event. Have
My
a
pleasure.
good morning and good night to all
Yes.
of you.
Also, please make sure, Weiqing, please make sure that you include all the links to all of the channels of our
Yeah.
participants, and encourage everybody to join those platforms and channels.
Yeah, I when I podcast on the YouTube channel, I include all of you guys' YouTube channel links in our descriptions, and also I will make sure everybody were included in our later distribution as well. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.